Are you worried that your child, who's about 4 to 6, is possibly bullying other children? My name's Jodie Thornton. I'm a parent coach and I work with mums to identify what their children need as individuals to be able to thrive, both feeling confident in themselves, but also to have great relationships with others. And so this topic is really about both of those things, about how your child feels about themselves and how they interact with others. So, why am I talking specifically about 4 to 6? In this age group, where children are in that kind of preschool or prep in various different locations, it's called a different thing, but that year before they go into formal schooling, the first year and the second year of school, it is a time where more of this behaviour comes up, and I'll talk about why in a moment. So first, when we talk about bullying other children, I think that in this age group, the 4 to 6 year olds, it might look and feel to us like it is bullying, but really what it is just a set of behaviours that are your child's best way of dealing with the problem that they have, whatever that might be, and I'll talk to you about how to work that out. So the behaviours that we're talking about are things like controlling the play, so deciding either I always have to have the first turn or I'm going to decide who goes first, who goes next, how is that going to work, and I always have to decide the rules and only I get to make those rules. It can also look like a more physical or intimidating behaviours. So we're talking hitting, punching, kicking, even just that kind of like menacing, physically menacing other children to intimidate them to do what they want. And sometimes they'll use some really harsh or socially excluding language. So things like, I'm not going to be your friend if you don't, or you can't sit with us, you're stinky, or, all those kinds of really can be really quite upsetting for us to hear our own child speak to somebody else like that. And they're really those words that are intended to create the kind of response in their friend that will make them do what they want. And that's why we think it reminds us of what bullying means. But in actual fact, it just doesn't have the same impact and flow on as it might in later years. So when we come across these behaviours, it's really important to notice what is actually happening. And often in this age group, it's actually something like anxiety, worry, or social unease. So they might be feeling uncomfortable about whether they will be included. They might be feeling uncomfortable about whether they will ever get the first turn, or even for some kids, it's I'm really worried that they're not going to follow the rules and then we will not have any fun. And then that comes out in controlling behaviour, which nobody finds fun, but that's their desire, is to make sure that by following the rules, and if everyone does what they're supposed to, then we'll be okay. And you can kind of hear in that there's a little bit of anxiety, worry, or fear coming up in that explanation. So for most children, that's why that behaviour is happening in this age group, that it's actually that they've had some kind of anxiety, general anxiety, or anxiety about the situation, worry or fears coming up, and this is the best way that they know how to make themselves feel better. And sometimes they don't notice that it's having an impact on the other kids. Sometimes they do, but they don't see a better option, so they continue doing it anyways. So why this age group? Again, we want to really zoom in on what happens in this age group. So at 4.5, there's a cognitive developmental stage, and those developmental stages happen at every half birthday anyways, between 1.5 and 5.5. But the 4.5-year-old one is the one where the limbic system, or the emotional centre in the brain, really connects more with the other parts of the brain. And that means that they get more overwhelmed and more intense emotional responses than they have before. And so we'll often see more of these worries come up at around 4.5. And then for the rest of the age, so 5.5, again, there's more developmental stage happening there, and that can impact their behaviours in this way. But more so once they pass 4.5, it will be around what actually happens to kids at this age. So it can be that all of a sudden they're the biggest kid at daycare. which can be unsettling for some kids, or they might not know how to respond to being the most mature or the inherent expectations of having to be the responsible one. And that can sometimes come out in that I'm controlling the play because I'm the oldest and I need to make sure that everybody is looked after. Then you also look at going into either a formal preschool or first year of school. Then you end up, for kids, it's a huge change to move from either daycare or being at home with their parents into a social situation where they're the smallest kid and there's possibly all these new kids, and it's a different dynamic when the expectations have changed. So when you're at daycare or at home, the expectations are that everyone will play and get along. There might be not so much structure, and it's all about everybody learning and having a good time in their own way. When you go to formal schooling, whether that's a preschool the year before your first year of school or the first couple of years of school, all of a sudden there's so much structure that then when it comes to playtime, it can be hard for kids to change gears. And then the other part of moving into kindergarten or the first year of school is a huge shift for many kids. And even moving into the second year of school, so in Australia that's called year 1 or first grade, in that shift from being in kindergarten into year 1, there's a different level of expectation, and even just changing classes. All of these things can have such a change in the social dynamic that all of a sudden kids who you wouldn't necessarily expect are starting to display these behaviours. Or perhaps kids that have sometimes had a little bit of these behaviours come up, it really ramps up in all this change and expectation and fear and worry. Now, as a very broad generalisation, kids who externalise their worries are more likely to be externalising in their behaviour. So what I mean by that is that your child who has had more explosive tantrums or has been more vocal about what's going on for them when they're upset is generally speaking more likely to then be someone who is more controlling or intimidating under stress. And as I say, very, very generalising there. And when you have a child who's more internalising, who might take time to process or withdraw, they'll tend not to be the ones who come out with this, what we might see as bullying behaviour. Although sometimes even your internalising child will come along and want to be making sure that everybody's following the rules. So now that we understand what's likely driving the behaviour, and if you have a sense that that's not what's driving the behaviour, keep looking because there'll be something else, because there is a reason your child is behaving like this. It's not random, and it's not just something to kind of stamp out of them. There's an emotional reason why the behaviour is coming up, and if we look at the emotional reason, then it's much easier to make the change. So, why is it important to handle this well? The biggest reason is that when we say to our children, you need to stop treating so-and-so like that, and we might use very sensitive language, we might be very calm, we might be very concerned and considerate, we inadvertently send a message that you feeling okay is less important than someone else feeling okay. And that's because the reason they're behaving like that is because they don't feel okay. So when we say you need to stop, it is not okay. And that's the end of the kind of conversation. It's like you need to just not do that behaviour. It's not okay. You're hurting your friends or whatever the conversation is. If that's the end of the conversation, the message, unintentionally, the message is you should suffer before you make someone else suffer. And we can get into all kinds of discussions about, whether we should suffer first or protect our own needs first. But the reality is, especially at this age, all we need to do is teach them problem solving, because there is a way for them to come together and work out how to work together, and everybody can have fun. So, and sometimes it can take a little bit of extra support to find that solution. But if we teach problem solving rather than teach sacrifice or protect your own needs first, then we can really get clever with how we solve those problems. And the second reason we want to be really careful about handling this well is that sometimes when we say things like, can you see how hurt Jodie is that you spoke to her like that? And again, do you see how in that, like, there wasn't too much tone in that? Like, there was a little bit of tone, but not too much. And it was all about, please have compassion for the other child. Like, please see how much this is actually impacting somebody else. And all your intention is to draw attention to how, being considerate to somebody else. If that if that's the whole conversation, we end up with a child susceptible to hear, I'm a bad person because I hurt other people, whether that's physically or emotionally. I'm a bad person. Who am I to be so horrible that I would hurt somebody else? And so that then brings in either shame, where they will start to feel guilty and awful about who they are as a person. And this is all it's just one conversation. So one conversation is not going to cause your child a lifetime of shame. That's not the point there. But the point being that instead of leaving them in a place where they might feel ashamed of having behaved that way, we can help them actually understand why they were driven to behave that way, and find a different solution, and just avoid that feeling of guilt and shame. Of course, the other alternative is that when we say things like, you need to be considerate about somebody else, you'll get kids who will say, not my problem, or I don't care. That rebellion kind of comes through, and that is a protective mechanism against the shame, and that's why they'll respond that way, because often we'll think, well, they have no remorse, they just don't care that they're hurting other people, when really what's going on, they're just protecting themselves from those feelings that are really awful. We all know what that guilt and shame feels like, that, and they are just protecting themselves from that. So that's why we want to handle it sensitively. How do we handle it sensitively? You want to start by first asking them about their intentions. We're going to draw attention to, why did they behave that way? So you might say, sweetie, when you were telling Sam how to play the game, what was important to you? Or, I noticed that you needed to tell Sam how to play that. Why did you need to tell him how to do it? And all you're doing is just opening up this conversation of, look, I know there's a reason, and I'm not sure what the reason is, but do you know what it is? And sometimes we'll be able to tell, but sometimes we actually have less understanding than we think about what is really driving their behaviour. So opening up that conversation does two things: gives us information we might not already have about what their intentions were, and secondly, it gets them to start to think about, what are my intentions? Well, I felt nervous that not everyone was going to get a turn. So by me telling him that he had to go, and then her, and then him, and then, that's how I made sure everybody had a turn, you can see that my intentions are about, I'm really nervous that if everyone doesn't get a turn, it's not going to be fair, and therefore that would be a problem. I'm protecting everybody from the lack of fairness that might happen if I don't intervene. So there you can see I'm really getting into understanding, what is the child's perspective? What is it that's driving them to think that way? And once you're able to articulate that back to your child, you do two things. You tell them this message that, I understand there's always a reason why you behave the way you do, that it's not that there's anything wrong with you or that you were wanting to be mean, but I really understand that there's something behind your behaviour. The second thing you're doing is helping them to see, sometimes when we see somebody else reflect back our perspective, we go, oh, I didn't really see that as clearly. Like, now I get it, that yes, it was so important to me that fairness was coming through. So once you've got that clarity around what's happened, we want to move into bringing the same level of clarity to what was happening for the other child or children. So what did you think he was feeling? Because I noticed that he stood up and walked away when you were doing that. Or I noticed that he started to cry. Or I noticed that his face kind of went, or, whatever you notice, you're bringing up, and I think, look, I think he didn't enjoy it. I don't think he was having fun. And then so you're bringing up this idea again that there's a reaction that somebody else has had, and you, my child, are capable of noticing that and being considerate of it. And then we're going to say, so if it's important for you that it's fair, and if it's important to Sam that it's fun, how could we find a way that we can get both of those things to happen? And so that in that problem solving, sometimes you'll get lucky and there'll be a solution straight away, but sometimes it takes practice. And particularly for the times where we hear about our child behaving this way in an environment that we're not there to support them, you might want to introduce the idea that they can ask for help. So whenever you notice that someone else is sad, unhappy, isn't having fun, not liking how things are going for you, you can think about what else could we do so that you're comfortable and they're comfortable and everybody gets to have fun. And if you can't think of a way to make it work, you can go and ask for help. You can ask the teacher, you can ask another friend, you can walk away, particularly for the children that are lashing out or intimidating. We want to really introduce the idea that it is okay to walk away and actually tend to how you feel. So if you're feeling angry that they're not being fair, that is a valid thing to feel. But when you then control the play or when you then intimidate the other child, then no one's having fun anyway, so it kind of doesn't work. Whereas if you're feeling angry that it's not fair and the teacher either can't or won't help you, you can go and play something else so that there is fairness. You don't have to stay and play something that you feel uncomfortable about. So you can see here that we're looking at what's happening for me as the child who's doing the bullying behaviours. We're introducing the idea of noticing what's happening to the other child, being sensitive to that without necessarily having additional support, because once they're 4, 5 and 6, they really are capable and generally they notice, they just don't know how to process both things at the same time. So that's what we're helping them with. And then that creative problem solving and getting support or choosing to walk away. So that those are the steps that we're kind of looking for here. So I hope that this has been really helpful, and I'd really love to hear in the comments below what has been the biggest insight for you from listening to this video, and what is it going to help you to do with your child. And I'd even love to hear after you try some of the techniques and find out like what changed, what came up and how did it work for you. Now, if you'd like a weekly email from me with parenting tips and inspiration and some of these helpful videos, you can sign up to my regular emails in the link that's underneath this video in the comments. Now, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that it's helped you to get closer to being confident to parent your child in the way that they need so that they can feel confident in themselves and also their relationships. Thank you so much.